My name is Ibrahim Traoré. I speak to you today not as a symbol, not as a headline, and not as a man seeking approval. I speak as a human being who has stood very close to death and returned with questions that power cannot answer. I was born into a land that has known struggle longer than peace. Burkina Faso is not a nation of comfort, it is a nation of endurance. From my earliest days, I learned that leadership is not measured by applause, but by how much weight one is willing to carry in silence. Over time, that weight became heavier. Coups, counter-coups, foreign pressure, internal fractures, and the endless suffering of ordinary families pressed against every decision I made. On the morning of February 4th, in the year 2026, I awoke with a restlessness I could not explain. The air itself felt tense. Reports arrived one after another, each more urgent than the last. Border instability, armed movements, intelligence warnings that spoke without certainty but carried unmistakable fear. This was not unusual. Yet something about that morning refused to settle. I dressed slowly, not because I had time, but because my thoughts would not run in a straight line. As president, I am trained to calculate risks, to measure probabilities, to trust security protocols and armored steel. Yet that morning, none of those things brought calm. I felt exposed, not physically but inwardly, as if something unseen was drawing near. Many who watch from afar believe leaders live above ordinary vulnerability. That belief is false. Power does not remove fear. It only hides it better. In moments of true danger, titles fall away. What remains is the soul, standing alone. I had been raised among Muslims. I had listened to Christians. I had spoken with elders who carried ancient wisdom without naming it religion. Faith to me had always been present but distant, like a horizon I acknowledged without walking toward. That morning, however, the horizon felt closer. I did not yet know that my life would hinge on a gesture so small it could be missed by anyone watching. I did not know that events already set in motion were moving toward a place where I was expected to stand. I only knew that the day had begun differently, and that difference mattered. Pause here with me, listen carefully, because what follows is not a lesson, not a sermon, and not a political message, it is a testimony. The convoy was ready before the sun fully rose. Engines hummed with a restrained impatience, the sound of disciplined force waiting for permission to move. Soldiers stood in silence, faces set, eyes trained outward. To them, this was another mission. To me, it was another calculation of risk, another attempt to stay one step ahead of forces that never announced themselves. I adjusted my clothing with practiced movements, nothing ceremonial, everything functional. Fabric chosen for heat, for movement, for survival. Beneath it all, protective gear that reminded me, without words, that my life was not entirely my own. A president does not travel lightly in a land like ours. Every road carries memory. Every bend holds history. As the vehicle doors closed and the convoy began to move, my thoughts scattered. I reviewed maps in my mind, security briefings, names of commanders, villages along the northern route. I told myself what I had told myself many times before: stay focused, stay alert, trust the system. Yet focus did not come. Alertness felt hollow. Trust felt thin. The road stretched ahead, long and uneven, cutting through land that had seen more conflict than cameras would ever show. Dust rose behind us, marking our passage like a trail that could be followed by anyone who wished us harm. I watched it through the window and felt an unease that had no clear source. It was then, without warning, that a memory surfaced. Not dramatic, not loud, simply persistent. An old priest, long ago, during a brief conversation that had seemed unimportant at the time. His voice was calm, almost tired, as if he had repeated the same words many times to many people who did not fully listen. He had said that when the heart becomes restless, when the mind cannot find order, one should make the sign of the cross. He said it was not magic. He said it was an act of surrender. At the time, I had nodded politely. Inside, I doubted. A gesture so small, so quiet, seemed powerless against the realities I faced. Bullets do not stop for symbols. Explosions do not pause for prayers. Power, I believed, was concrete. Faith was abstract. Yet there, in that armored vehicle, surrounded by men trained to protect me with their lives, the memory would not leave. It returned again and again, pressing gently but firmly, like a hand on the shoulder that refuses to be ignored. I argued with myself in silence. I told myself this was not the moment. I told myself it was unnecessary. I told myself I did not fully believe. And yet, belief is not always required for obedience. Sometimes, it is the other way around. I looked around. No one was watching me closely. No one expected anything from me in that instant. The radios crackled softly. The road continued. Time moved forward, indifferent to my hesitation. Then I did it. Not boldly, not publicly. I traced the sign of the cross slowly, deliberately, aware of how small the movement was, a hand to the forehead, to the chest, from one shoulder to the other, a gesture so ordinary to millions, yet foreign to me in its intimacy. I whispered a prayer, not eloquent, not rehearsed, just a request for peace, not victory, not protection in the heroic sense. Peace, for myself, for those around me, for a nation that had forgotten what peace felt like. Nothing happened. No sudden calm washed over me, no dramatic sign appeared. The vehicle did not stop, the road did not change. The convoy continued exactly as it had before. If anyone had been watching from outside, they would have seen nothing worth recording. And yet, something shifted. The restlessness did not vanish, but it softened. The noise inside my mind grew quieter, as if a door had been closed somewhere deep within. I did not feel fearless, I felt steadied, as though I had acknowledged, for the first time that day, that my control was limited, and that admitting this did not weaken me. I sat back and breathed more slowly. I told myself not to read too much into it. I told myself it was merely psychological, a trick of the mind. Leaders are trained to distrust coincidence, to demand evidence, to separate emotion from decision. I returned to my role, to my posture, to the expectations of command. The convoy pressed on toward the north, toward a place already marked in the plans of others. I did not know that events beyond my sight were aligning with precision. I did not know that timing, terrain, and intention had already been calculated. I only knew that I had made a small gesture and that the day continued. Looking back now, I understand something I did not understand then. The sign of the cross did not announce itself. It did not demand recognition. It simply placed me, however briefly, outside the illusion that I was sufficient on my own. That illusion is powerful. It keeps leaders standing long after they should have knelt. It convinces men that steel and strategy can answer every threat. It whispers that humility is weakness. That morning, for reasons I still cannot fully explain, that whisper lost its grip. The road ahead remained dangerous, the decisions ahead remained heavy, but the gesture had been made, quietly, almost accidentally, and the world unseen moved forward from that point. I did not yet know where that movement would lead. By midday, the sun was high and unforgiving. Heat pressed down on the convoy, seeping through steel and glass, testing both machines and men. The northern terrain slowed us more than expected. Roads narrowed into paths that barely deserved the name. Every kilometer demanded attention. Every delay stretched the schedule thin. I checked the time more than once, not out of impatience but awareness. The meeting ahead was important. Commanders were waiting. Plans had been prepared. In regions like ours, postponement can be interpreted as weakness. Absence can invite speculation. I had never taken lightly the decision to change course. Then the vehicle shuddered. At first it was subtle, a vibration that did not belong to the road. Then a sound sharp and wrong, followed by a loss of smooth motion. The driver reacted instantly, slowing, signaling to the rest of the convoy. We pulled to a stop where the land offered little cover and less comfort. Security tightened at once. Soldiers moved into position with practiced efficiency. Others approached the vehicle, scanning, listening, touching metal that radiated heat. The air filled with murmured assessments, the language of professionals trying to diagnose a problem quickly. I stepped out briefly, more to feel the situation than to intervene. The smell of overheated machinery mixed with dust. Faces were serious. No one dramatized the moment. That alone told me enough. The verdict came quietly. A serious mechanical failure. Not superficial, not something that could be corrected on the side of the road. Repairs would take hours, possibly longer. In that environment, time was not neutral, time was exposure. I returned to my seat and considered the options. We could wait, attempt a repair, arrive far behind schedule, entering a sensitive zone with daylight fading and security stretched. Or we could accept what had happened and withdraw, rescheduling the meeting for the following day under better conditions. Neither choice was ideal. Leadership rarely offers comfort, it offers responsibility. I listened to my advisors, I weighed the risks. I thought of the soldiers who would have to secure the area if we stayed. I thought of the message sent by delay versus cancellation. And I thought, unexpectedly, of the quiet prayer I had whispered hours earlier, not as instruction, not as command, simply as presence. I made the decision. We would cancel the meeting, we would return. The risks outweighed the benefits. Pride had no place in the calculation. Lives did. The convoy turned around. There was no relief in that moment, only acceptance. The road back felt longer, heavier. I wondered how the decision would be interpreted. I prepared myself for criticism, for speculation, for questions that would come later. A president must answer for his choices, even when those choices are made in silence. We reached safety without incident. The day ended without headlines, without ceremony, without consequence that anyone could immediately see. On the surface, it was an uneventful return caused by mechanical failure. One more inconvenience in a life full of them. That evening, I allowed myself to rest, not deeply, not easily, but with the sense that the day had closed without demanding more from me. I did not yet know that the story of that day had not finished telling itself. I had just begun to settle into the quiet of the evening when the phone rang. Not the kind of call that waits, not the kind that asks permission. It rang with urgency, the sound cutting through the stillness like a blade. I answered immediately. The voice on the other end belonged to a senior military commander stationed near the northern border. I had known this man for years. He was not given to panic. He did not exaggerate. He spoke carefully, even under pressure. That night his voice was different. He did not begin with formalities. He did not offer context. He went straight to the point. The location where our meeting had been scheduled had come under attack. As he spoke, I closed my eyes without thinking. The details followed quickly. An armed group had launched a coordinated assault, heavy weapons, precise timing, the kind of operation that requires planning, intelligence, and patience. This was not random violence. This was deliberate. The attack had been large, larger than what was typically seen in that region. The military had responded swiftly, managing to regain control after intense fighting. There were injuries, there was damage, there was chaos. But the worst outcome had been avoided. Then came the sentence that changed the air in the room. The attack had occurred at the exact place and approximate time the meeting would have taken place. I did not speak for several seconds, not because I did not understand, but because understanding arrived all at once, heavy and unavoidable. The images formed on their own, the room where I would have stood, the path I would have walked, the soldiers who would have surrounded me, the confusion, the noise, the vulnerability. Had the meeting not been canceled, I would have been there. When the call ended, I remained seated, the phone still in my hand. The room felt smaller, the silence pressed in. This was not fear in the ordinary sense, it was recognition. A slow, unsettling recognition that a line had been crossed without my knowing. Leaders are trained to analyze events after they occur. We look for patterns, motives, explanations that can be documented and defended. But there are moments when analysis falls short, when facts alone cannot carry the weight of what they imply. I thought of the mechanical failure, the timing of it. I thought of the decision to cancel, made against instinct and expectation. And I thought again of that gesture in the vehicle, the sign of the cross, the prayer spoken without confidence, without certainty, without drama. I resisted the conclusion that formed in my mind. I told myself coincidence is a powerful illusion. I told myself humans seek meaning where there is none. I reminded myself that machinery fails, plans change, and violence waits for no one. Yet the sequence refused to be dismissed. The attack did not happen earlier. It did not happen later. It happened in the space that would have been occupied by my presence, by my body, by my voice. I walked to the window and looked out into the darkness. Somewhere far north, men were being treated for wounds. Somewhere, families were receiving news that would change their nights forever. Somewhere, those who had planned the attack were realizing their objective had not been met. And somewhere, unseen and unnamed, a line had been drawn that I had not crossed. That night I did not sleep easily, I did not pray long prayers, I did not attempt to explain what had happened. I simply sat with the knowledge that something had intervened, something beyond my schedule, my security detail, my authority. For the first time in many years, I allowed myself to consider that protection might not always announce itself with force, that sometimes it arrives disguised as delay, as inconvenience, as disappointment, and that sometimes the most dangerous places are the ones we leave behind without knowing why. The morning after the attack arrived without mercy. Sleep had come in fragments, broken by images that replayed themselves without invitation. I rose early, not out of discipline, but because remaining still felt dishonest. Something had happened that demanded clarity, not comfort. The investigation began immediately. In matters like this, speed is not about vengeance. It is about containment. Facts must be gathered before they dissolve into rumor. Testimony must be taken before fear reshapes memory. I ordered that everything be documented with precision, no assumptions, no shortcuts. By mid-morning, the first reports reached my desk. They spoke of captured assailants, weapons traced to known networks, movements tracked through weeks of preparation. This was not the work of desperate men acting alone. It was structured, financed, informed. Then came the interrogations. I did not attend them. A president does not need to be present for truth to emerge. Sometimes presence interferes. I waited instead for transcripts, for summaries stripped of emotion and framed by facts. When they arrived, I read them slowly. The leader of the group spoke first. He did not speak with pride. He did not speak with regret. He spoke as a man who had failed and knew it. His words were direct. They had been hired. They did not know by whom. That was not unusual. In this region, violence is often outsourced through layers designed to protect the true authors. What mattered was the target. The target was me. Not a convoy in general. Not a military outpost. Not a symbolic disruption. The objective was the president of Burkina Faso, expected to be present at a specific meeting, at a specific place, on a specific day. They knew the schedule. They knew the route. They knew the timing. The attack had been planned to unfold when attention would be divided, when protocol would be relaxed by the familiarity of an internal meeting. The kind of moment where leaders speak freely, where guards adjust their posture, where routine creates vulnerability. Everything had been calculated. Everything, except one detail. The meeting did not happen. The interrogators pressed further. How did they respond when they learned of the cancellation? The answer was simple. They did not learn in time. Communication delays, assumptions, a belief that the schedule would hold. They proceeded as planned, expecting me to arrive. When I finished reading, I placed the documents down and remained still. There was no triumph in me, no sense of victory. Only a sober awareness of how narrow the margin had been. I imagined the alternate version of that day. The vehicle does not fail. The meeting proceeds. The attack unfolds as designed. History shifts in a way no investigation can reverse. I had spent years preparing for visible threats, for speeches that angered powerful interests, for decisions that disrupted old arrangements. I had accepted that such a path invites danger. What I had not fully accepted was how fragile the line between presence and absence truly is. That line on that day had been drawn by a breakdown no one could have planned. Or so it seemed. I closed the file and leaned back. The room felt unusually quiet. The facts were clear, the intent undeniable. The outcome, however, refused to be explained by logic alone. Powerful men often speak of destiny when it suits them. I have never trusted such language. It can be used to excuse arrogance and silence accountability. Yet there are moments when events align with such precision that denying their meaning requires more faith than accepting it. I did not claim certainty. I did not declare miracles. I only acknowledged sequence. A restless morning, a remembered counsel, a gesture made without confidence, a mechanical failure, a canceled meeting, an attack on an empty place, an investigation confirming what absence had already suggested. This was not proof in the way courts require proof. It was not evidence in the way historians prefer evidence. It was something quieter, heavier, and harder to dismiss. That day, my life continued because I was not where I was expected to be. And I began to understand that expectation itself can be the most dangerous trap of all. When the investigation concluded and the urgency receded, I finally found myself alone. Not the kind of solitude that comes from being unguarded, but the kind that appears only after danger has passed and left questions behind. The room was quiet, too quiet. Silence has weight when it follows survival. I replayed the sequence again, not to analyze it as a strategist, but to feel it as a man. The smallest details returned with clarity. The texture of the road, the heat inside the vehicle, the sound of my own breath as I hesitated, the awkwardness of making a gesture I did not fully understand. I had spent much of my life believing that chance was simply the name we give to complex systems we do not yet comprehend. As a soldier, as a leader, that belief had served me well. It kept me focused on preparation rather than hope, on action rather than waiting. But now, the word chance felt insufficient. The only reason I was not present at the site of the attack was the failure of a machine. The only reason I accepted that failure was a decision that went against habit, and the only thing that preceded that decision was a moment of surrender I had almost dismissed. I asked myself difficult questions, not the kind asked in public, but the kind asked when no one is listening. Was I assigning meaning after the fact because survival demands it? Was I turning coincidence into comfort? Or was I resisting meaning because accepting it would require change? I did not rush to an answer. Faith, I realized, is not certainty. It is willingness. Willingness to admit that not everything bends to calculation. Willingness to accept that protection may come from places we did not authorize. Willingness to stand before mystery without demanding it explain itself. I remembered the words of that old priest more clearly now. He had not promised safety. He had promised peace. Those are not the same. Safety is an outcome. Peace is a posture. On that morning, I had not asked to be spared. I had asked to be held. The distinction mattered. As president, I had learned to speak in statements, to conclude with clarity, to resolve ambiguity for others. In that room, alone, I allowed ambiguity to remain. I allowed myself not to know. That too felt like a kind of humility I had rarely practiced. I did not announce my experience. I did not use it to persuade or to command belief. I kept it close, like something fragile that could be damaged by exposure. Not all truths need an audience to be true. Yet the conclusion settled quietly, without argument. That day, I lived because I was guided away from where death waited. Whether one names that guidance God, providence, mercy, or something beyond language is not for me to dictate. I only know that the gesture I had considered insignificant became the turning point I could not ignore. The sign of the cross did not stop bullets. It did not dismantle armed groups. It did not end conflict. It changed where I stood. And sometimes where you stand is the difference between history and silence. I remained seated long after the sun had moved across the sky. I thought of leaders who never returned from meetings, of nations reshaped by seconds, of families whose histories end because timing did not bend. That evening I did something I had not done before. I thanked God without asking for anything in return. Not for power, not for victory, not even for protection. Only for the reminder that my life, however public, was still held by something greater than my will. After reflection comes responsibility. When a man survives what he was never meant to survive, he must ask what he is meant to carry forward. Silence has its place, but so does testimony. Not testimony that instructs others what to think, but testimony that reveals what has been learned. I learned first that the sign of the cross is not a performance. It is not an identity marker or a public declaration. It is an admission that one's strength is incomplete, that control is fragile, that the self, no matter how disciplined or trained, is not sovereign over life. In that moment, inside an armored vehicle, I was not declaring belief. I was acknowledging limitation. I was saying, without eloquence, that I could not secure my own existence by strategy alone. That acknowledgement did not weaken me. It steadied me. It removed the burden of pretending that everything depended on my vigilance. I learned this as a leader. Power surrounds leaders with illusion. Weapons, ranks, titles, and systems create a sense of insulation. Over time, this insulation becomes dangerous. It convinces leaders that humility is optional, that reverence is outdated, that reliance is failure. That morning taught me otherwise. No convoy can see everything. No intelligence report can predict every intention. No authority can command time itself to slow or accelerate. A leader who forgets this will eventually govern by fear, because fear is the only tool left when humility is absent. Placing God above my plans did not absolve me of responsibility. It clarified it. It reminded me that leadership is stewardship, not ownership. That the lives entrusted to my decisions are not extensions of my ambition, but sacred responsibilities I will one day answer for. I also learned this as a human being. We often dismiss small acts of faith because they do not match the scale of our problems. We believe that if a gesture cannot change everything, it changes nothing. This is a misunderstanding. The smallest acts are not meant to overpower reality. They are meant to reposition us within it. When danger is unseen, God has already seen it. When plans appear solid, unseen variables are already moving. Faith does not cancel danger. It prepares the soul to be redirected before danger arrives. I do not claim that every prayer will alter outcomes in visible ways. I do not claim that belief exempts anyone from suffering. I only claim what I lived. A small, sincere gesture altered my path. Not because it forced God's hand, but because it opened mine. There is a difference. Many expect faith to act like a shield. I experienced it as guidance. It did not stand in front of me. It stepped beside me and turned me away at the right moment. That is not spectacle, that is mercy. If there is one lesson I carry forward, it is this. The gestures we make in private often determine the outcomes we face in public. The posture of the heart shapes the direction of the body long before danger appears. On that day, I did not escape because I was powerful. I escaped because I was willing, briefly and imperfectly, to entrust myself to something greater than power. That lesson remains with me now, heavier than any title I hold. As I bring this testimony to its end, I do so without triumph and without fear. I speak to Muslims and Christians, to elders of the Sahel, to leaders across the world, and to every soul who has lived long enough to know that strength alone does not save a life. I do not offer this story to divide belief from belief. I offer it to remind us that humility is older than any doctrine and reverence is deeper than any border. Long before nations learned to name themselves, human beings learned to bow their heads. They did not bow because they were weak. They bowed because they understood that life is not self-generated. Africa has known suffering. The Sahel has known hunger, displacement, and violence that rarely makes the evening news. Yet it has also known endurance, prayer spoken in many languages, and hands lifted not in surrender to despair, but in trust that tomorrow might still come. I stand within that tradition, not above it. To my Muslim brothers and sisters, I say this with respect. You know what it means to submit the will to God. You know the discipline of prayer, the courage of restraint, the power of intention. What saved me was not a symbol alone, but the posture behind it. Submission is not defeat. It is alignment. To my Christian brothers and sisters, I say this gently. The sign of the cross is not a superstition. It is a confession. A confession that love stands above force, that mercy interrupts violence, and that the smallest act done in faith can redirect an entire life. I did not earn protection. I received it. To the elders and leaders of the Sahel, I speak as one who carries the same burden you carry. Power tempts us to harden ourselves. Survival pressures us to trust only what we can touch. But nations are not sustained by force alone. They are sustained by conscience. When conscience is lost, victory becomes meaningless. To the world beyond Africa, to those watching from distant places with comfort and stability, I ask only this. Do not mistake security for invincibility. Do not confuse technology with wisdom. The systems you trust today can fail tomorrow. When they do, what remains is not what you built, but what you believed. I survived a day I was not meant to survive, not because I was clever, not because I was strong, not because my enemies failed. I survived because I was guided away from danger before I knew it existed. That guidance did not shout, it did not threaten, it did not impress. It arrived quietly, in a moment I almost ignored. If there is a call within this story, it is not to adopt my faith or my language, it is to recover reverence. Reverence for life, reverence for limits. Reverence for the truth that leadership without humility becomes destruction. The world today is loud with accusation and certainty. Everyone claims to know who is right and who is wrong. Few are willing to pause, to kneel inwardly, to ask whether their confidence has replaced their conscience. I ask you, wherever you are, whatever you believe, to consider returning to the small acts that ground the soul. A prayer spoken without performance, a moment of silence before decision, a gesture that admits you do not see everything. These acts will not make headlines, they will not impress crowds, but they may save you from standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. As for me, I continue my duties with the same seriousness, the same responsibility, and a deeper awareness of my limits. I do not govern by fear of death. I govern with gratitude for life. I wish peace for Africa, not the peace of silence imposed by force, but the peace that grows when leaders remember they are accountable beyond their own power. I wish peace for the world, not the peace of comfort, but the peace that comes when conscience is restored. And I wish for you, the listener, the quiet courage to turn away from what destroys and walk back toward what gives life. Before I leave you, I will say this plainly, without embellishment, without disguise, because truth does not require decoration. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. What I have told you is true. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. I stand by these words as truth spoken from experience. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and I affirm before God and humanity that these things are true. If this testimony has spoken to you, carry it with you, reflect on it, speak of it if you must. And if you wish to continue walking these conversations together, you may choose to remain here, to listen again, to reflect again. There is no pressure, only an open door. May peace find you before danger does.